All right. Well, we heard from 5 fairly different companies, but I think what they all have in common, obviously, is that you all developed your tech at Tufts, or your co-founders did. So I'm curious to know, how did you select, which technology to go with, and how did you decide when it was ready, to go to market? So, Natalie, if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, great question. So last year at this conference, the Commercialization Lab was incubating between like 3 and 5 different projects. And I was pretty much equally excited about all of them, but got a lot of advice that we needed to focus. And we originally had a different idea that was going to be our spin out, and we were thinking about out licensing for the albumin technology. But we kept getting incoming interest from companies that wanted samples of the albumin ingredient. And I think that was just a clear signal, like, oh, someone actually wants this. We're not, we don't have to sell it as much. People really understand. So I think that was a really clear signal that that was the technology that we should focus on. And it's been, I think, just shown that that was the right decision ever since we kind of tuned focus.
It's fascinating. It came from customers that made the decision ultimately, which is how it should be. Sophie, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, we've been focused on insect cells for a long time, so there wasn't really the different projects to choose from, but I think the question also was, how did you decide if it was ready to commercialize?
Yeah.
So that, I think a lot of it was from that Acorn Innovation Grant, where it was the first time that we actually kind of stress tested this in a way that was like, could this make a viable business? And at the same time, we also did an NSF I-Core, so a customer discovery program, where we talk to a lot of customers and see what their pain points are and see if this actually is something that could fit their needs. And so I think those two together, it was a lot of learning for both of us as technical founders of what actually makes a good business. And that was partly why we chose the pet food angle. But I think kind of having those lenses on the academic research, and then also seeing how much progress we could make in a relatively short amount of time, in a relatively short amount of capital with the Acorn Innovation Grant, as soon as we said, what should we do to make this actually a viable company? When we said, okay, well, we're gonna try and grow 1 kilogram of biomass and do some safety nutrition testing, and it pretty easily passed both of those tests. So we thought, okay, this is something that we could actually keep going, and we were getting signs from our customer discovery interviews that it seemed viable to them as well. So.
And that's a great call out, the NSF I-Core program. I mean, doing a structured customer discovery process is so important. How about you, Rickey?
I probably have a unique case here in that I didn't develop the technology that we're working with. I was drawn in as a company operator by my co-founders to sort of help translate the tech to a commercial platform. And when I looked at the space, it's not an easy time to look at the space and enter the space, I'll tell you. I followed 2 core principles that I look at when I evaluate any tech. Does the core problem still exist? Is there, and it is, there's high demand in protein. You heard from a lot of folks earlier today about the sustainability issues and the supply chain restraints. And then second, does the technology that I'm gonna be associated with have a way to make a meaningful impact in the space? And those both boxes got checked.
Makes a lot of sense. How about you, Joanna?
I mean, David sucked me into this.
He has a gravitational pull about
It's
him.
a really cool job. No, but I left a really cool job for an even cooler job here at Materialize and through Tufts. I worked for a company called Integra Life Sciences, which and they make collagen nerve tubes, and the yields are, I hope no one from Integra's in this room, but terrible. And we were so limited with the changes that we wanted to make. We wanted to make nerve tubes that were wise. We couldn't make them. And there were so many times that I asked my R&D teams at the various different companies I was working with, like, can we do this? And finally, David said, hey, like yearly coffee, we can do this. And I said, oh, wow. So we didn't have a product fully committed in mind of what medical device we were going to work on first. And they had been working on ear tubes, which when I went out to the space, especially the investor space, everyone was like, no, terrible idea. These are cheap, ingrained, hasn't changed in forever. Don't touch that. And it actually wasn't until last year that I really felt strongly validated that we made the right choice to try to upscale on ear tubes. I'm a mom too, so I kind of ignored the investors, and my kid had lots of ear infections at the time. So I was like, we need to change this. So last year, we met the American Academy of Otolaryngology president, who's a pediatric otolaryngologist. And he stepped into his role and pretty much is changing the entire ENT space, making them more receptive to change, bringing in new materials. And it's at that point where I said, okay, we did make the right call. We're innovating in a space that's on the upscale of change. And we really felt validated that we were tackling a problem that was at the right time and the right technology to change.
Great. And Lindsay.
I too just do what David Kaplan tells me to do. No, I think as someone, I graduated with my PhD over a decade ago, went off and worked at a startup for a decade. It was at that startup that I learned kind of the hard way, the playbook, and in many ways internalized it very deeply, how to commercialize deep tech for consumer applications. So I had in my mind this deep conviction of how things needed to go. And it was right around the time that my time was ending there that David said, I think I have something for you. And looking under the hood at it, it really came down to, is the IP defensible? This technology is incredibly elegant, and yet also really, from a startup perspective, from a commercialization perspective, relatively easy to scale, easy to make make large volumes, and then doing a thorough supply chain analysis and COGS analysis. And so that was the main thing, on top of course, this huge need in the market from the problem that I mentioned.
That's great. Well, we'll do a couple more round robin questions, and then I see some kind of Shark Tank questions directed at some of the companies here. But let's start, or let's shift over to talking about the funding environment. And how are you thinking about capital efficiency? And I think whoever feels most drawn to jump into this one first, feel free. But I would love to hear about how are you thinking about runway? What hard choices are you making along the way? Like, what's that journey been like for you?
I can start.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of advice came from you, to be honest. But I think part, because you told me you're like capital efficiency, and I was like, okay. But we're scaling with a CDMO partner who you introduced us to. Thank you, and they've been incredible. And I think we are looking at what it would look like to build a facility in the long run, but considering for CDMOs for much longer than I think we would have without that input and the learnings from the previous companies.
I'd say we start with a lot of therapy, but more seriously, I've heard a lot about this today, and we've heard a lot about it talking to investors who have been beat up in this space already. In any emerging technology I've found and I've studied, this is a normal part of the cycle. It starts where it seems like it's oversubscribed, it's all this hype. The pendulum never swings back to the middle. It always goes to undersubscribed and underhyped, and at some point it stabilizes. And if you study teams that space agnostic, that tend to do well in those environments, what they do is they remain diligent, they build technical credibility, they stay really, really disciplined with the capital that they have. They tie those capitals, not to grand visions anymore, but to real tangible milestones. And I think if we follow a similar path, we'll all come out okay on the other end of this.
Lindsay.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
Okay. There's two words that have entered my vocabulary recently, and as part of this endeavor, and it's ruthless prioritization, emphasis on ruthless. We very early on made a list of what I call skillets to the forehead. What are the things that if this went wrong, we'd be like, oh, if we had just done that sooner or figured that out sooner, we would know that this was a go, no-go. And you just make that list and you stick to it. You drop things if it is saying no a lot and really driving towards those key things of, we all talked about them, so I don't need to list them, but ruthless prioritization, you can have that.
Yeah, I mean, piggybacking on that, focus is the most important thing, I think, at the early stage of a company, is making sure that you do something very well and you complete it. And I think all of us probably are very gritty, and any successful startup company, I think, will be very gritty and try to spend as little capital as possible to do as much as they can. But at the same time, you have to realize that time is also very expensive. So we try to focus, and we try to take calculated risks and do things in parallel. So oftentimes we'll make an assumption that something's going to work and start something else at risk, but very, very clearly define that. So it's been a good strategy.
Time is the only thing you can't earn more of,
Yeah.
they say, right? Yeah.
Have anything to add except trying to learn from companies that are ahead of us and the ecosystem around us and taking all the advice that we can get. And then, yeah, I was going to also say just focus. It's only two of us, so we can only do so much. So we have to be, I like the term that Lindsay used, so maybe we'll steal that.
Yeah, I actually like that. That's a good point, Sophie. It's like sometimes your best mentors aren't the people who hit the finish line. They're the people who are like one or two places ahead of you, and you can really like be in it with them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, great. Let's see. Can we talk about what challenges you've experienced when shifting from an academic mindset to one that's more commercial? And I know, for example, Rickey, you kind of came from a commercial mindset maybe from the beginning, so maybe you can talk about your co-founders. But yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about what that mindset shift was like.
Sure, I could start off on that. And this does not just pertain to this startup, but to several I've been a part of. I think when you look, especially for co-founders who come up from academics, their DNA is exploration. Their DNA is generating ideas. And as Lindsay pointed out, with the company, especially at early stage, we need to take that shift to rootless prioritization. And sometimes it's really hard, I've seen, for scientists who spent most of their life generating ideas to take that path.
Yeah, I'd say as one of those scientists who really likes to ask why, it is challenging to have to be, there's so many fascinating things about insect cells that I want to explore, and I have to just say, this is not what I have to do right now, even though I can still think about them, in my free time. But we do just have to put like very strict lens on what we do. And that has for sure been a challenge, but it's also been something that I think both my co-founder Michael and I have found that when we put these kind of stringent constraints on what we can research, we're not gonna figure out the why, but we're gonna say we have to do this in the most cost-effective way and the fastest way we can. We sometimes come up with the most creative solutions, and that's been kind of a really fun switch of mindset for me to realize as we go towards commercialization from academia.
Yeah, I think there's so many elements of the mindset that have to switch. One very specific one that John and I always talk about and are working on is like communication. So I've noticed that technical and scientific people, myself included, tend to, when we're asked a question, we want to paint the entire picture and give all the caveats and be like, well, in this case, it's not. And we almost like undersell a lot. We just are really good at like self-critiquing. And sometimes you have to just think about, the person who's asking your question, like what are they actually trying to know? And sometimes it's a yes or a no. and that's what they're looking for. So I think the communication switch is a big one, and that, we could all practice in our careers earlier.
That's a good one. How about Joanna? Anything come to mind? You can say pass too.
What I do think is that we've had some interns through the MLSC internship program, and I also think that my switch when I went from my PhD into industry was fast, and I was sort of splattered, with the reality of how technology has to perform for a human being. And I think for food it's the same thing. Like it's dangerous if your technology is inconsistent. And the more we can give academic students an exposure to the gravity of their work, the faster they transition into the industry mindset of the importance of validating something over and over and over again to perform. sort of my
I think everyone covered it.
Yeah,
so,
everyone covered it. All
We
right.
have questions again.
Well, great. I think I'm getting message from Mira that we have time for one more question. So, so beyond the IP, what specific Tufts resource or connection really proved valuable that you didn't expect? And I think what I'm getting at with that is, what unfair advantage do you think you got from being at Tufts? So,
I think like people is maybe an obvious answer, but maybe like convening, like so many companies and people will like come to Tufts for different events, so we don't really have to leave our home to get exposure to a lot of prospective customers, investors, collaborators. Bringing everyone together in one place, is good.
I think I undervalued the value of the ecosystem at first. Some of the most value is right here on stage. Just not that misery loves company, but we're all going through the same pain and suffering, if you will, and just be able to share notes. Also, I mentioned earlier in my presentation that the Tufts incubator space, we are early tenants there. That's been a blessing for early stage company with scarce access to funding. And then continued collaboration with the Kaplan Lab and the strong science that comes out of there. It's just been incredible for us.
Yeah, Tufts supported us through the space. Tech transfer has been so lenient and supportive of our fundraising journey and helping us get through the licensing agreements. I mean, Tufts has saved us a lot of capital that we've been able to redirect into actual productive work that changes the IP into value. So it's been a true collaboration.
I know Joanna said we save the last for last, but I call her for advice, I think, more than she calls me for advice. So she's my hero. But yeah, it's the speed dial of people that I have on my phone. You know who you are. You're in the audience, some of you. But I come on campus and I'm giving hugs to people and chatting with people and bouncing ideas off of people. And I think there's just this one thing that really ticks me off as a scientist first and entrepreneur later is we are all developing these amazing technologies. But sometimes you can have the best idea, and as it goes through that commercialization story, it just gets weighed down by various different symptoms of greed. People wanting a bigger piece of this technology that is still being built and still learning how to fly. And I think there's a lot of institutions out there that like to make that a heavy journey. And I think what Tufts is doing here is so special, is it's lifting the technology up, getting the technology out into the world where it can do what it's supposed to do. And that takes an ecosystem, and I see it here, and that is really, really, really special.
Sophie, you want to take us home?
Sure. Yeah, I'll be quick. So yeah, people for sure. Also, the new venture competition was a real turning point for us in the Derby Entrepreneurship Center. We did their summer accelerator, and that was where we learned a lot of business fundamentals. So I think access to that, as well as the Cell Ag ecosystem, has been really instrumental.
Great. Well, I wish we had had a chance to take some more questions to the individual companies. However, I encourage you to come up to them, ask them whatever burning questions you have about how their companies and their technologies work. And thanks very much.